Enjoy with your headphones for a better listening experience.
Please watch till the end of the video to have the most scariest part of the story.
Serious, what do you think is the creepiest / most disturbing unsolved mystery ever? 87, two young boys in Arkansas, Don Henry and Kevin Ives, were run over by a train, but they didn't move when the train came and were laying on the tracks. The train operator said they were laid across the tracks and did not move at all when the emergency brakes and horns were wailing at them. The train went 1,000 feet over the point of impact, leaving the bodies in bad shape. Police found a .22 and flashlight near the bodies, but no other evidence. According to the autopsy, the boys had smoked equivalent to 20 marijuana cigarettes and passed out on the tracks and ruled it an accident. The parents didn't agree and hired new investigators. A second autopsy was done out of state and was concluded that maybe 2 marijuana cigarettes were smoked by them, and got the status changed to probable homicide. Further investigation found a stab mark on the back, and the shirt lined up with that, for Don Henry. And Kevin Ives had his skull bashed in by his own rifle, evidence pointed to hair and blood present on the rifle. The father of Kevin Ives believed this was true because he had instructed his son about firearms and did not believe he would lay his rifle on the gravel and scratch it up. The final theory was that the boys' deaths were related to drug trafficking. It was believed they stumbled across a drug deal going down and were killed. The prosecutor who fumbled the case was later implicated for the murder, after he was found to be dealing in drugs and was believed to have destroyed evidence that could have led to a break in the case. Another person implicated in the case was stabbed shortly after being named. Several witnesses came forward and all of them died under suspicious circumstances. Each of these people, including those implicated in the murder, had their autopsies done by the same person who did the boys. The case got cold and has been since 1988. I lived about 10 miles from where the boys were found on the tracks, and my mother wouldn't let us out after dark anymore. I was 12 at the time and knew Kevin Ives from baseball. I remember the news was talking about it almost daily. I may not remember all the name and details, but I am sure it's on the web somewhere. The women of Juarez. Over 300, maybe 500, women in Mexico were brutally murdered, and there haven't been any answers as to who did it. Anytime someone got close or tried to make progress on the case, it would be stopped. Most of the time it was an American detective who tried, and as soon as it hit Mexico it would just disappear. I have a feeling it's one huge scandal. Yuba County 5. 5 men, each with their own mental issues, were driving home one night and took a turn into basically the wilderness. Nobody ever heard from them again, but one witness says he saw a large group of people get out of a car and walk off while he was having a heart attack in his car. Later on, the bodies of 4 of the 5 were found, but Gary Mathias still has not been. One of them was in a ranger's shack, which had plenty of food and supplies. The other 3 were found scattered throughout the woods, all having died of hypothermia. The shack could have lasted them all enough time to be found, but 4 of them decided to leave it. Nobody knows why they took that turn, or got out of their car, or left the shack. Nobody knows. Theories are all that can be spread. To me, the creepiest part is Gary Mathias was never found. Edit, link to a video explaining it should be in the comments. Goes deeper into this than my comment ever could. 2 Italian cases, the first one is an excessively big one. One Emanuela Orlandi disappeared in 1983 in Rome or the Vatican City. Could have been involved the church or the mafia. She was kidnapped and never found again. 2 Ilenia Carisi, daughter of 2 famous Italian singers Al Banu and Romina Power, mysteriously disappeared in 1994 in New Orleans. Her mother honestly believes she's still alive and her father believes she died drowning in the Mississippi. The so-called murder-suicide of Harry Horse and Mandy Horn. The inconsistent and blatantly false news reports made total are of the situation. I feel Nexpo's video on the situation gathers all the information nicely. For those who don't know, Harry Horse was a game developer who lived with his wife Mandy in Scotland. Mandy fell ill with MS and her rapidly deteriorating health left her increasingly disabled and Harry was her primary carer. Two friends were visiting the couple on the night of the incident, and this is where witness statements begin to contrast. Harry was apparently known for his mood swings and odd comments, especially on the night of the incident. He's reported to have said, paraphrased, "It's a wonderful night for a killing." Mandy begged for the two friends to stay, but they left. Said friends claimed to have left a jacket behind, so a little while later they returned to the house. The door was open. The place was a gruesome, bloodied mess. Their pets were slain. Mandy had been stabbed over 30 times, a broken knife was left inside her. Harry had bled out from 47 wounds including mutilated genitals and slashed arms. This was initially reported as a Romeo and Juliet suicide pact, and then a murder-suicide. Harry was said to have consumed a cocktail of drugs before brutally murdering his wife and pets before turning the knife on himself. But Harry's autopsy reported a total absence of drugs. From Class S to benzos to paracetamol, there was nothing. The door being open? Friends forgetting a jacket on the infamously cold Shetland Islands? Nobody having the slightest clue what happened. None of it adds up to me. I may have forgotten a lot of information and for that I'm deeply sorry. Honestly, the more you find out, the more confusing it becomes. The Princes in the Tower. Two young sons of King Edward IV disappeared while living in the Tower of London under the custody of their uncle Richard, who became King Richard III. In the 1600s, bones were found under a staircase in the tower. They were assumed to be the boys and given a burial in an urn in Westminster Abbey. Those bones have never been DNA tested and we do not know if they are boys. The Black Dahlia. Everything about it is disturbing. This was clearly the magnum opus of a serial killer, yet it's treated as a bizarre standalone murder/body dump. Forensics doesn't have a prayer. With all the ham-fisted investigations, the girl's reputation was smeared without proof or reason, and it's so long ago now that nobody really cares. The 1998 murders of Ben Smart and Olivia Hope here in New Zealand. They had been celebrating New Year's at a lodge in the Marlborough Sounds when a stranger offered for them to stay on his boat. Last time, they were ever seen alive. After 5 months of investigation, they arrested a man named Scott Watson, who owned a boat in the same bay called the Blade. At the trail, they presented little actual evidence. Witnesses from the same water taxi use said that they weren't dropped off at the Blade. DNA from a hair sample that could not be proven to be Olivia's and had a hole in the bag, and 2 prison inmates that said Scott admitted to them that he said it. Everything presented was as follows. The main witness against Watson, Guy Wallace, the water taxi driver who supposedly dropped Watson, along with Smart and Hope, off on the Blade, now insists it wasn't him, and that he was hoodwinked into making the identification. Wallace, and everyone else who identified the guilty man, said he had at least medium-length, unkempt, wavy hair that evening. Photographs taken that day show that Watson's hair was noticeably short and trim. Wallace and the other passengers at the time also insist that it wasn't the Blade they were dropped off onto. It was a much bigger boat, with complex rigging, a catch that you had to reach up to from a water taxi, unlike the Blade. What's more, There were plenty of sights of such a catch in Endeavour Inlet and the sounds that New Year. The evidence of Watson's arrival time at Erie Bay kept getting pushed back during the investigation, to give Watson time to steam out into Cook Strait and dump the bodies, it seems. But even with his arrival at its latest, and his boat speed at its maximum, the trip was physically impossible in that time frame. The Crown's two-trip theory, sprung on the jury at the last moment, was that Watson had returned to the Blade at 2 a.m. and then gone back to shore where he was seen at about 2:45 a.m. But this is disproved by the occupants of the boat Blade was tethered to. Put together, their evidence is that he arrived sometime around 3 a.m., and certainly not significantly earlier. The police lied and said he scrubbed his boat clean. He did not, it was wiped down maybe 30%, the police later admitted, easily explains by a normal cleaning of the boat in the weeks after police say he murdered them. Prisoner later recanted, saying the police visited A 10 times in the lead up to the trial and he wanted out of prison at a later parole hearing because a gang member had treated him, so he lied thinking the police would help him. Prisoner B never recanted, but when he got out the police gave him a car and cell phone in order to thank him for the testimony. Oh, also, just so happens that the hair sample of Olivia only turned up in the evidence bag collected from the Blade after the police searched her home. Before that, the hair sample did not exist. That's it. That's all it took to convict Scott. That and the police leaking that they were sure he did it. He and his family were criminals. Scott has filed a lot of appeals which have failed. Next one is due next month. In fact, he was eligible for parole in 2015, but because he still refuses to admit guilt, they won't release him. A lot of people in New Zealand think he didn't do it. I am one of them. Policing in NZ at the turn of the century and beforehand was a shitshow with police actively lying in court to get what they want. I believe this is one of those times. I can recall a few high-profile examples of mysterious circumstances, but it is a total mindfuck to experience one personally. An acquaintance of mine who worked in my career field disappeared a few years ago and to my knowledge was never found. Years ago, he and I were slated to work on a project together and he flaked out at the last second. He said it was a mental health issue. We had a small circle of mutual friends. A few months later, he suddenly left the city where we both lived. I've looked his name up a couple of times a year, but haven't found an update. No note, no body, nothing. All kinds of people in our social circle were concerned about his disappearance, but had no success in finding him. I wonder if he's out there under an assumed name or even alive. On November 15, 1966, two young couples were joyriding around in a black 1957 Chevy to a remote hangout spot north of Point Pleasant known as the TNT area. One of the couples was Linda Scarberry and Roger Scarberry, the other was Steve Millette and Mary Millette. When they got there next to the abandoned North Power Plant they suddenly saw two large red eyes which reflected the light from the car's headlights. Steve noticed it first and pointed it out to the group. That is when they are said to have noticed that the glowing red eyes belonged to a strange creature. They claim to have seen a gray man-like figure with wings go around the corner at the old power plant. They said that the creature didn't run, but wobbled like it couldn't keep its balance. Linda described the creature as having circular fiery red eyes and a body like a man but with wings. They said the creature was about 6 or 7 feet tall with wings folded against its back. Half man, half monster. She said, you could see muscles in its legs. The couple couldn't believe what they had seen. They quickly drove off onto Route 62. Linda yelled for Roger to hurry. The couples then saw the creature on a hill by a large billboard as they went around a curve. It spread its wings and went straight up into the air. They were all terrified and kept yelling for the driver to go faster. The Mothman began gliding back and forth over the back end of their car. We didn't know what it was. I don't think we've ever been so scared, said Linda. As they went along a straight stretch of road, they were going over 100 miles per hour, but the creature was still able to follow them. They saw it in the back window and saw the shadow go across the car as it flew. They couldn't get away from it. They could also hear the wings hitting the top of the car as they drove. It's even said to have left scratch marks on Roger's '57 Chevy. Squeaked like a big mouse, said Mary Millette. They were only able to get away from the Mothman when they reached the edge of Point Pleasant. The creature disappeared, veering off into a field, as they went into town. The couples continued going into town. They stopped at the local Dairyland as they tried to figure out what to do next. Linda suggested they go to the police, but Steve and Roger thought they'd just laugh at them and wanted to go back to make sure the thing was still there first. The group ended up being too afraid to do that, so they turned around. As they were turning around, they saw a large dead dog lying along the road, which was gone when they went by again later. According to the couples, the winged creature jumped out as they passed where the dead dog was, went over the top of the car, and went through the field on the other side. They drove back into town and parked at Tiny's Diner and decided to contact the police. The teens told their story to Deputy Millard Halstead. They told police that they saw a large, winged creature whose eyes glowed red when the car headlights picked it up. They described it as a flying man with 10-foot wings following their car. Halstead didn't believe them at first, but knew that weren't troublemakers and saw that they were genuinely terrified, so he actually went out to investigate their story. The couple drove back out to the TNT area with the deputy. Millard shined a spotlight around the area, including the tree lines. Deputy Halstead is said to have heard strange static disturbances coming from his radio that he couldn't explain, but he found no clear sign of the creature itself. The witnesses were sitting in their car and said that they saw shadows circling nearby and a cloud of dust kick up from an adjacent coal yard. The Millettes were too scared to go back to their homes. They stayed at the Scarberry's trailer, turned all the lights on and stayed awake all night from fear. The following day, Sheriff George Johnson held a press conference to discuss the sightings. The local press began printing the story and named the creature Mothman based on the comic book character, Batman, who had just gotten a television series at the time. Steve Millette told the local newspaper, "We understand people are laughing at us. But we wouldn't make up for all this to make us." That same day, the couples went back to the TNT area during daylight and found odd-looking tracks resembling two horseshoes put together but smooth. Steve saw something flies up inside a boiler when a door was kicked open. No one stayed around long enough to see what it was. After this original sighting, an increase in people began reporting seeing similar things, such as Marcella Bennett's sighting, which happened a day later. Hundreds of cars full of eager people swarmed out to the TNT area at night in hopes of seeing the Mothman. A shadow was cast of the valley of Point Pleasant, and thus began the legacy of West Virginia's Mothman. The kidnapping and murder of Muriel McKay in 1971. She was kidnapped from her home by two brothers and was, allegedly, fed to the pigs on their farm, while they negotiated for a ransom. Both brothers got life for murder, kidnap, and extortion. Recently, Nizamuddin has claimed to know where the body is buried. Disappearance of Antoinette Cayadito. This 9-year-old girl in NM was missing early in the morning after answering the door. Literally snatched from her front door. The story doesn't add up at all. A year later, a young girl calls 911 claiming to be Antoinette and saying she's been taken and was now in Albuquerque, New Mexico. In the background you can hear a male voice yelling, "Who told you could use the phone?" followed by Antoinette screaming and the line going dead. The recording is so sad. Years later though, the mother confesses to being involved in her kidnapping. There was a man, a family friend, who was infatuated with Antoinette, and many believe the mother sold her to him. The worst part is that through every part of this case, the police failed Antoinette over and over. Not only do they do a terrible job of investigating, but the mother's story keeps changing and they do nothing about it. The 911 operator in the recording doesn't ask her any important questions, and when her mother confesses to being involved in the kidnapping and alludes to the man who it did, the police do nothing. They don't look for her, they don't look for him, and the mother faces no jail time. She would be 47 years old if she's still out there. I do think that there's a good chance she might still be alive. Existence. Big Bang? The invisible force of the whole universe is just on the other side of the invisible walls of our reality. Sure, makes total sense. Creation? An omnipresent, omniscient, all-powerful being without beginning or end, which provided us with an almost infinite amount of space and time while allowing us the capacity to interact and understand almost 0% of it. How strange for there to be anything at all. The boys on the tracks. Long story short, 2 boys got killed, placed on railroad tracks, and ran over. There was a big cover-up by the police and autopsy doctors. Most witnesses died in obviously murder ways, which were also covered up by the same autopsy doctors. The police also were very careless in the investigation and literally left several easily visible body parts, to be found later on. The official ruling was that they got so high that they fell asleep on the railroad. They were barely high. The Tylenol murders. 1982, Chicago, Illinois. 7 people, including a 12-year-old girl and 3 members from the same family, which lead to the discovery, were poisoned by cyanide from tampered bottles of Tylenol. Almost immediately, the drug was pulled off the shelf. Fearing possible copycats, other medicinal products were also pulled. This single act is why so many of us today have to pull off stickers, caps, and plastic wrap as a measure our products were not tampered with. The tube sock killer case. In 1985, in the state of Washington, 2 couples and 1 family went missing from the campsites/trails in Pierce County. Stephen Harkins and Ruth Cooper went missing August 10 after not returning from a vacation. On August 14, Harkins' body and dog were found. He was shot in the head while he slept. The dog was also shot to death. On October 26, 2.4 kilometers away from where Harkins' body was found, Cooper was found, well, her skull that is. 2 days later her body and purse were found 15 m from her skull. On her body was a tube sock wrapped around her neck. She died of a gunshot wound to the abdomen. On December 12 of 1985, Mike Reamer, his girlfriend Diana Robertson, and their daughter Crystal Louise Robertson, who was 2, traveled from Tacoma to Pierce Country for camping. Reamer also had traps out there he was going to check. Later that same day, Kmart customers and employees noticed Crystal alone in the parking lot 48 kilometers north of the camping site. Crystal was placed in temporary foster care since she couldn't answer any questions the police officers asked her or didn't want to. It wasn't until her maternal grandmother saw her photo on the news 2 days later that she went to get Crystal. When her grandmother asked where her mom was, Crystal said that mommy was in the trees but couldn't tell any more than that since she was 2 and didn't have enough vocabulary to properly explain.
On February 18 of 1986, Robertson's body was finally located half buried in the snow. Reimer's red 1982 Plymouth truck was also located near Robertson's body. And like the last victims, a tube sock was found wrapped around her neck. She died from being stabbed 17 times. They believed Reimer had done the crime since in his truck was a note on the dashboard that said, "I love you Diana," and Diana's mom said it was his handwriting, and also bloodstains were found in his truck. Reimer also was a violent man, and he and Robertson split up many times in the past, so the police officers thought it was possible. As well, he was charged with domestic assault against Robertson. The police officers tried to think, well, maybe he killed Robertson, grabbed his kid, dropped her off outside the Kmart and fled since they never found his body. And thought maybe he killed Harkins and Cooper since the tube sock was wrapped around both Cooper and Robertson, but they couldn't find a motive. Or whoever was doing this made Mike a victim too. At the time, law enforcement also believed these crimes could be connected to the March 1985 abduction and murder of Edward Smith and Kimberly Diane Lavine, who were a couple from Kent, Washington, and they were abducted and killed and disposed of in a gravel pit near the Columbia River, though this murder has been solved, but some people believe it may be connected still somehow. In 2011, hikers discovered a partial human skull that was determined to be Mike Reimer. He was within a mile radius of Robertson's body. They were not able to determine his cause of death though, but his skull was buried, meaning someone had to have buried him. After 1985, there wasn't any more killings using a tube sock, so either the killer moved on, aka got married or something, died or went to prison. But they'll never know. The Yuba County Five. Even the most likely story just begs a dozen more questions, which simply cannot be answered by anyone bar those 5 men. Oh, and the Dyatlov Pass incident also comes with a vast number of further questions which cannot be answered. I'm not sure I'd want to know anyway. Whatever happened up there doesn't seem natural at all. It's not much of an unsolved mystery, I guess, but I really want the details of what exactly happened to Lacey Fletcher. A woman who sat on a couch for over 10 years, without getting up once. She eventually died from starvation and illness. Her legs were eroded away from years of sitting in her waist, and she weighed something like 80 pounds. The thing is, she lived with her parents. At no point did her parents try to help her, and in fact, are suspected of having been the ones to confine her to the couch. She was only discovered when a neighbor happened to spot her in a window, and her parents were forced to report their daughter's death. She had died less than 48 hours prior. I just have so many questions. Did Lacey's parents force her to sit on the couch like this? If so, why? She had gone through school, had lived a relatively normal life. She was an adult when she had become confined to the couch. Her parents claimed that Lacey had voluntarily sat upon the couch due to her autism and mental illness. But they didn't do anything about it. I just want to know what happened to Lacey in those 10 years. The Vegas shooting. They went really quiet on that one fast. Never got any real info on motive, or even if it was the guy they said it was. Man supposedly brought hundreds of guns into a casino with cameras everywhere, and there isn't more clear footage of him in the process? Not to mention audible gunshots from at least 2 separate locations in the videos with 2 distinct rates of fire. What has actually happened there? What happened to John Franklin's Arctic expedition? It's not a mystery in the usual sense, because we know what the end result was. 129 men all died and both ships sank. But everything that happened in between them, last being spotted by whalers in July 1845 and the first search expeditions arriving in 1848 to 1849, is a mystery.
We have just enough clues to know that something horrible happened to those men. Bones found with evidence of cannibalism, men's bodies scattered across hundreds of miles of land suggesting a desperate final death march, scrawled notes indicating dire winters spent trapped in ice and a catastrophic loss of leadership. There are reports from Inuit of desperate, starving European men wandering the Arctic as late as the 1850s. Were there still survivors alive somewhere when the first rescue expeditions showed up? As of now, no one has found the remains of Franklin himself or the ship's log, which might indicate just what went so horribly wrong. I recently found out about the case of Chris Kremers and Lisanne Froome. That one is really bizarre. They went missing in the Peruvian mountains and months later their things were found with some inexplicable photos on the camera. Later some bleached bones turned up. The Murtaugh murders. I know the dad was convicted, although currently appealing, but there is so much death and cover-up surrounding that family. I really want to know what happened that night. The full truth from the dad, or even if it was someone else. What happened to the housekeeper? Where did all of the money the dad stole go? What other crimes were they involved in? The 1981 Cabin 28 murders at the Keddy Resort/Campground in Northern California. Brutal and deranged killings by a psychopath murderer still remains unsolved after over 4 decades. The murders of Russell and Shirley Dermond occurred in early May 2014 in Putnam County, Georgia, United States. The decapitated body of Russell Dermond, age 88, was found on May 6, 2014, in the garage of the house he owned on Lake Oconee. Neither his head nor his wife, Shirley, age 87, could be located in the house. Over a week later, Shirley's body was discovered floating in Lake Oconee, her body having been weighted down with concrete blocks. As of 2023, the murders remain unsolved, and Russell's head has not been found. They lived in a neighborhood of homes costing over $1 million. It is a gated community, and it appears that the murderers likely came in by boat. Such an incredibly violent/savage murder with no known motivation. University of Idaho has a past beyond the 4 murders that happened last year. Kristen Noel David, a 22-year-old senior at the University of Idaho, was last seen alive on Friday, June 26, 1981, while bicycling from Moscow, Idaho southward on U.S. Highway 95 towards Lewiston, Idaho. On July 4, 1981, David's dismembered remains were discovered in and along the Snake River 6 miles west of Clarkston, Washington. The remains had been concealed inside black plastic bags. Not all of her remains were found. Her bicycle, clothing, and other personal items were never recovered. Her family lived in my grandparents' neighborhood. Kristen babysat my uncle and aunt. My family knew this young woman and her family well enough. It's still disturbing that this is unsolved. I wish she could have gotten justice. This is a mystery of my stepmom. She grew up on the reservation back in the 80s. She and a group of friends including her brother were having an illegal bonfire in the woods one night. Their friend I'll call Mark left the group around midnight. The next morning police come to the house questioning her and her brother about Mark claiming he never came home, and police found his car parked in a secluded area by a lake. Nothing was stolen from the car including a hunting rifle and a baggie of weed. Nobody had any idea what happened to Mark. 48 hours later he was found in the woods hanging from a tree. His hands were tied behind his back, so police ruled out suicide. The disappearance and murder of the Jamison family is weird because almost every possible scenario seems plausible. Was it a drug and/or gang thing? Bobby Jamison alleged when filing a protective order against his father that he was involved in meth dealing, prostitution and organized crime.
Was it a cult thing?
Sherilyn Jameson's mother expressed to investigators that she believed her daughter was on the run from a cult.
Did someone suffer a mental breakdown?
Sherilyn's bipolar disorder was poorly managed, and Bobby asked a local pastor if he could buy special bullets that could kill spirits he'd seen in their home in the days leading up to the disappearance.
Could they just have encountered a random stranger while in the remote area their vehicle was found in?
Sure, there was a bizarre final photo of Madison, the daughter, appearing to be looking at something away from the photographer in distress, found on Bobby's phone that some say points to a scenario like this. The erratic behavior of the family before the disappearance, planning to sell their home and live in a shipping container. Sherilyn had graffitied with threats against killing stray cats, bizarre surveillance video recording them loading the truck with their belongings in a trance-like state, could also be said to point to any number of hypotheses. For an honorable mention, they had also had a bad falling out, involving gunfire, with a family friend who was associated with a white supremacist group.
But there are just as many reasons why any of these scenarios could be ruled out. The protective order against Bobby's father was thrown out.
Sherilyn's mom couldn't provide a name or any other description of the cult she thought her daughter may have been involved with. All the family's valuables, including $32,000 in cash and their dog, were found in their abandoned vehicle. Anybody with a possible motive in the family's disappearance also had a solid alibi. Finally, the remains of Bobby, Sherilyn and Madison weren't discovered until 4 years after their disappearance, about 2.5 miles away from where their vehicle had first been located, in an area that had supposedly been extensively searched. This is a counterintuitively common occurrence in missing persons cases, and there could be many reasons for this depending on the terrain, but some of them, such as if they had been buried there or not, would obviously have had important implications for what actually happened to the family. Unfortunately, when the remains were recovered, they had been picked over by animals and had been exposed to the elements for too long to give much useful data. Altogether, there are too many bizarre details surrounding this case to easily fit into any one plausible narrative.
The Black Dahlia Murder, 1947. Elizabeth Short was 22. She was found in a vacant lot in L.A. She'd been cut in half, blood drained, and she had been further mutilated in the face, torso, and her intestines had been removed. It's just gruesome. I've watched a lot of TV shows about it, read books and articles about it. The newspapers of that era made her out to be a bedhopper, a gold digger, all that to sell papers. Trashed her reputation. Elizabeth Smart really deserved better. And the investigation. The killer contacted the newspaper and sent her personal papers to them. Honestly, it was a bit like Jack the Ripper when he taunted everyone. A lot of men were interviewed and cleared. There's a lot of great articles and books and stuff about the case. Okay, I'm late, but that story is about the 12-year-old kid who was found dead in his backyard while he was babysitting his baby brother. I can't remember his name, but he was wearing his stepdad's clothes or something. I wish I remembered his name. This happened a few years ago, and all the details are so bizarre. Scrolled through most of the post and was surprised not to see Brian Schaefer mentioned. Brian Schaefer, born February 25, 1979, 1-2, is an American medical student at the Ohio State University College of Medicine. On the night of March 31, 2006, Schaefer went out with friends to celebrate the beginning of spring break. Later he was separated from them, and they assumed he had gone home. However, a security camera near the entrance to a Columbus bar recorded him briefly talking to two women just before 2 a.m., April 1, and then apparently re-entering the bar without any evidence of him leaving the area. Schaefer has not been seen or heard from since.
The case has received national media attention. Schaefer's disappearance has been especially puzzling to investigators since there was no other publicly accessible entrance or exit to the bar at that time. Columbus police have several theories about what happened. Wink with a frown. 4. Some interest and suspicion has been directed at a friend of Schaefer's who accompanied him that night, but has refused to take polygraph tests regarding the incident. 5. While foul play has been suspected, including the possible involvement of the purported smiley face serial killer. 6. It has also been speculated that he might be alive and living somewhere else under a new identity.
I've always wondered what happened to Sabrina Eisenberg. I lived near that area at the time and the baby Sabrina case was everywhere. I know a lot of people, including the police, think the parents had something to do with her disappearance, but I don't think they did, or maybe they did? I have no idea. So, who took her? Is she alive living a regular life and has no idea she was kidnapped as a baby? How could someone just walk into their house in the middle of the night without making a sound? Babies and kids disappearing from their own home always creep me out. Haley Cummings, another kid missing from Florida, is also a mystery that needs to be solved. What happened to these girls? The fate of Adolf Hitler. All they found in him was a jawbone. There was no body to be found, and to this day no one knows where his remains are. His personal dentist confirmed that those were his jawbone and teeth, which is weird, to say the least, since he could easily have gone through surgery to escape Germany. A lot of historians think that Hitler died in the bunker, but there's no absolute evidence for it. It's like the crucifixion of Jesus. It's likely, but impossible to confirm. I think people simply want to believe so bad that Hitler died in the bunker that no one really had the courage to investigate or question it. If he escaped, he could have hidden in South America and lived until ripe old age, like many of the high-ranking officials of the SS. The Australian family, the group that would abduct, torture for days, then murder and dismember young men in Australia. Never caught. I guess it creeps me out because of the group nature of the crime. One creep abducting and torturing/killing is bad enough, but multiple like-minded people are terrifying. Also, they chose high-risk victims, not in that the victims were at risk, but that they were strong young men, most in their 20s, who could have potentially gotten away. Doesn't seem like any ever did though. We get desensitized to women being the targets of this type of crime. But the idea that someone like my brother, physically fit and confident, more prone to taking risks, could suffer that fate is just another punch in the... Brianna Morroway, from the Wellington region of New Zealand, disappeared just over a year ago, being last sighted at Tohoro. The identities of many people involved are known, but it seems like a case of people sticking together to protect each other. Someone out there knows what happened. She was only 22 years old and is a cousin of one of my friends, and it breaks my heart to know that her last moments may have been spent with creepy, cruel older men. I hope she's at peace and I hope her family will be able to find closure. Well, there was a murder that took place pretty much close to where I spent my childhood/teen years in Roermond. The victim's name was Pete Mergelsberg. He was visiting the grave of his wife. Someone sneaked behind him while he was standing before the grave and bashed his skull in with a sledgehammer. He was left to die, and his watch was taken. They've never found any trace of a possible suspect, and there are no eyewitnesses. My great-grandfather may or may not have been killed by Richard Angelo. I know he was marked as a possible victim, but we never knew because he was cremated. He went to the hospital one day for either foot or back pain, talking about how he had this really nice male nurse, and then he died from cardiac arrest, or something. Since he was old, they just said he died of old age or whatever,
his heart was too weak to go on. It was only until after Richard Angelo was arrested for causing cardiac arrest in several patients did my great-grandfather's death come into question again. However, no autopsy was performed, and you can't perform an autopsy on ashes and dust. My family believes that he was most likely a victim regardless of the lack of hard evidence. The most disturbing thing about it is that Richard Angelo is still alive. If I wanted, I could send him a letter and ask him myself, but do I want to? I could get an answer, but since he's already locked away, do I really want to be the one to open that wound and possibly cause another investigation if he decides to admit guilt? Some questions are best left unanswered. Justice was already served anyway. The Atlanta child murders. After watching the show Mindhunter, I got really into the case because I lived in the area and knew some of the locations. I'm aware the murders ended after Wayne was captured, but there were many details police didn't look into. Like kids saying there was a white man who took pictures of them in a brick house by the old baseball stadium and a lot of kids went there for money. On top of that, people like Jovita Moore and others who worked at the same news broadcasting company knew him and just said he was weird but not a murderer. He was at the scene because he took photos of all the crime scenes. I just think there was more to the story, in my opinion. Potentially, the case of Dr. Sneha Phillips, who disappeared sometime between September 10 and September 11, 2001. It's baffled me ever since I heard about it. Basically, she disappeared just before or during the 9/11 attacks and no one knows for sure if she went to Ground Zero to render aid, she was a physician after all, or if something happened the night before. Her body was never recovered from the site, which I know is not necessarily unusual, but also no one has been able to put her there. However, there is also no evidence of foul play the night before. Basically, this woman just vanished at the same time America suffered its most significant day in the 21st century. Officially, she is among the victims or presumed victims at Ground Zero, but here's my problem. Wouldn't a doctor or nurse report to the hospital they work at in anticipation of an influx of patients from a mass casualty event? Maybe she will go to the Twin Towers initially, but surely she would soon leave to go to the hospital. How the Luigi's Mansion, 1, sort of exists. Why is the floor plan of the mansion so weird? Are all the portraits of ghosts living in the mansion related? Or why do they live in the same mansion? There are only 4 bedrooms. Considering the nursery of baby Chauncey, and how many portrait ghosts are lingering in that place? 20? 20 plus? Skull, how come Professor Gad claims the mansion showed up only a few days ago, yet he already had so much information about the mansion and the ghosts, which is really unrealistic considering a few days ago is around 4 to 7 days. Also, given the history of the portrait ghosts, they were almost all humans before, and if you read the biography of Lydia, the mother of Chauncey and the twins, it said that she had hidden money around the mansion to provide for her afterlife. Ha! Isn't the mansion made up by King Boo? Hasn't it only shown up a couple of days ago? Yet the mansion looks incredible old, like it was built in Middle/Western Europe in the mid-1800s. Weirdly enough, it has electricity. Why does a place full of ghosts, that hate the light, still have electricity? Or considering how Victorian era like the portrait ghosts live, they must have added electricity to the mansion. I have so many questions. The Root Harvest Festival in Vegas. Multiple people reported there were multiple shooters. People got shot at ground level opposed to downward from a vantage point of the hotel. Multiple shell casings were recovered on the ground all over. There's a video of them stating the shooter has been subdued in his hotel room on bodycam, then you hear gunshots ring out afterwards. And a personal anecdote: I saw a tweet stating there was a shooter on the strip with an automatic rifle prior to the shooting. I lived in Vegas at the time and followed a lot of Vegas-based news accounts. Also, the fact the gunman's house in Mesquite was broken into after the FBI searched it, but they attributed it to the wind blowing open the door.
Cleveland torso murders. Around the 1930s, people began finding baskets left in public areas.
When they opened them, they would find a human torso, and a varying number of limbs that may have been from the torso. Some of the more intact bodies were identified, and their whereabouts traced to a massive tent city under a bridge. All of the bodies were of homeless or transient people. The murders grew more audacious, bolder. One basket was left in the public park at lunchtime. Another, on the steps of the Cleveland police station. Eventually, the newly formed Federal Bureau of Investigation stepped in of their first major operations. And eventually, this man left the final body 15 feet from J. Edgar Hoover's house, while he was in it. Hoover was so frustrated he ordered his brown shirts to literally burn down the tent city, leading to multiple deaths and disappearances. Nice guy. The murders stopped after that, and whoever did it is long dead. Still makes you wonder though. The wow signal. Long story short, in 1977 a radio telescope in Ohio picked up an unusual radio signal. So unusual, in fact, that the guy monitoring the telescope wrote "wow" next to the recordings. The reason it was considered so weird was because it had every hallmark of an intelligent, artificial radio broadcast, but it seemingly came from a star hundreds of light years away. This got a lot of people excited. Was it our first proof that intelligent alien life existed? So, we kept listening to that area of the sky, and nothing. Zilch. Nada. The wow signal never repeated. So, not to beat around the bush, what was it? It doesn't seem like anything that could have happened naturally, and if it were the result of intelligent aliens you'd think we would have found more signals like it by now. Pretty much nothing fits. It's one of the few truly unexplained phenomena in astronomy. I consider it the most disturbing unsolved mystery mainly because of what it implies about our place in the universe. The signal was received from a star 1800 light-years away. If it were sent by aliens, they must have had radio technology 1800 years ago, meaning they'd be incredibly advanced far beyond us by now. On the other hand, if it were a natural phenomenon we just don't understand, that implies we're most likely the only intelligent species in our galaxy, since we would have heard from any others by now. Either way, the implications for our place in the cosmos aren't pretty. I can't really pick one, I know of plenty. What I will say is, back in the 80s/90s on the UK show Crime Watch, there were some really creepy unsolved cases/mysteries. The reconstructions of these cases made them even creepier. There were a few that would stick with me from there, but there was one that stood out, and that was the death/reconstruction of Karen Hales in Suffolk, England. It was November 1993 and a young mum was alone in her house at night with just a baby. She had the TV on, but she heard something coming from the front door. She went out to the door to see what it was, and she saw the door handle moving up and down. She was too afraid to call out and ask who was there. Anyway, the next day, she told her husband, who was doing the night shift, and he told her not to worry. Later that day, she heard a noise again, but this time it was a noise that murdered her. Her parents came over that day and saw her dead body burning away whilst her baby was crying her head off downstairs. They never solved the case, and the reconstruction of the door moving up and down will always stick in my mind. There was another one in 1983 and Janice Weston got out at an A1 lay-by to change her tire. This also happened at night. Anyway, what she didn't know was in the bushes behind her, watching her, was her soon-to-be killer. He watched her for ages changing her tire, then he killed her with her own tire iron, they assume. Later, a couple parked in the same lay-by and found her lifeless body in the ditch by her car and her car still there. The reconstruction on that one was also eerie, with the killer in the bushes behind her watching.
The Somerton Man. A still unidentified man's body found in Somerton Park in southern Australia. Several strange things including his clothing, shoes, and lack of tags lead to many questions being asked about where he came from, was going, or who he was. Several clues were found later on, like a briefcase full of things including a very particular and uncommon type of thread that had been used to sew up a hole in one of his pants pockets. Months after the discovery of the body, they also found the Persian phrase Tam am Shad written on a scrap of paper found in the fob pocket of his pants. The phrase roughly translates to is over or is finished. Investigators have also found a coded note that to this day has yet to be deciphered. Some locals even reported that they believed they saw a well-dressed man carrying the body to the location he would later be found at. There's honestly so much going on in this case, I'd recommend reading the wiki page on it. Yuba County 5. Wendy Goon made a video on the incident, but what happened pretty much was there were these 5 guys who were planning to go to a local basketball game the night before their own game. What actually happened was they went to a completely different area where they had left their car that seemed to be stuck in the snow in the mountains. They decided to run up the mountain instead of going down where there's more civilization. Only 4 of them were confirmed dead from combination of frostbite/hypothermia, and the 5th guy was never found even though traces of him were. People speculate that the 5th guy had maliciously killed them, but there isn't enough evidence to prove that. The British spy/analyst found in a suitcase. I don't know about creepiest ever, but I've been fascinated by it since it happened. Gareth Williams was found in a suitcase in his bathtub. He was either unconscious or willingly went into the bag. Due to the size of the compartment, he died within minutes. The heat was turned up to max. No fingerprints were found on the bag. Initially, investigators claimed a game, like autoerotic asphyxiation, gone wrong. But the coroner ruled murder. What I found so odd about the case was how multiple agencies dragged their feet in the investigation and seemed so hell-bent on working the sex angle. A former Russian spy claimed the SVR had a mole inside GCHQ and Williams was killed to protect the mole's identity. While Russia was active in Britain at the time, that doesn't seem legit to me. Multiple agencies wanted to bury or write off the investigation. What did he discover that made him such a target? The 2006 disappearance of Brian Schaefer. He was last seen on surveillance entering a bar, but was not seen exiting. It's possible that the cameras may have missed him, but there were no other exits in the bar, aside from one that was not generally used by the public to a construction site. Other surveillance in the area showed no trace of him. For me it is JonBenet Ramsey. I was pregnant when she died and only live an hour away, so that one was always more personal to me. I have read several books on the murder, and nothing quite adds up. If I had 3 wishes from a genie, I would use one to find out who killed her. The spraying of Agent Orange in CFB Gagetown, New Brunswick, Canada, 1956 to 1964. The unsolved mystery is how this is still unacknowledged over 60 years later. I guess Canada wanted to help the USA develop crop destruction weapons and volunteered one of our military bases, and the town of Oromocto, for field testing,
then decided spraying over 200,000 gallons of Agent Orange could be covered up if we all pretend hard enough. Maybe it's because we made millions of gallons of AO in several of our factories to be sprayed on Vietnam? See for yourself, Ottawa committed an atrocity against its own citizens, and a crime against humanity. Just for how recent it is Noah Donahoe. So many aspects don't add up, mostly how he would have found that storm drain. How he drowned but only had water damage to his hands and feet. It's just so disturbing watching his family beg for more investigations and then being flatly turned down. Maybe not creepy but sad that it's so celebrated is the JonBenet Ramsey story. Unsolved and both parents dead, and yet every couple of years I see these poor kids' face in a magazine. I never open them and wish she could just be left alone now. It's been 30 years. My whole life seeing this girl next to the word murdered. For me, it was the Dyatlov Pass, but it seems like they've sort of solved that one, so I'll go with Chris Kremers and Liz Froome. The Dutch girls who disappeared in the Panama rainforest. The circumstances around the discovery of their remains are very odd to me. Dry backpack with undamaged items inside? Boot with food snapped off at the ankle still in it. Bleached bones? What happened? The disappearance of Amy Lynn Bradley. A young American woman who was kidnapped off a cruise ship and, probably, sold into sex slavery and transported covertly all around the world. Even an American naval officer apparently met her and a brother in the Caribbean where she begged for help, but he didn't report it because he didn't want to ruin his career. But nobody is paying attention to this case anymore. The two little girls on the bridge in Delphi. The worst part is that it likely would have been solved if not for local police mishandling the case. The voice recording is the worst. My heart breaks for those families. Philip Taylor Kramer disappeared February 12, 1995, on the way to pick up a business partner and his wife. Later his body was found in his minivan, and it was judged as a suicide. No medical investigation could be done due to just being skeletal remains. End of story, or was it? Philip Taylor Kramer was a member of a band called Iron Butterfly. He was also a video and sound engineer. He invented a video compression system that was ahead of its time in 1992. But he was also looking into something that got a lot of attention from some apparently spooky people, as he had told his father. It was a transmission project that would result in faster than light speed communications. Interestingly, on December 8, 1996, all of his work disappeared right before it was to be uploaded to new internet servers at Berkeley University. Makes you wonder, huh? What happened to Madeleine McCann? Think about it. Someone just casually strolled into the room and grabbed a child. What did they do so that the other kids didn't wake up? That she didn't wake up? Why did the parents and all their friends with kids think it a clever idea to sit at the completely other side of the resort getting hammered? Why does the story keep changing? First the door was broken and wouldn't lock. Then the window. Then the door was left ajar to let air in for the kids. Then suddenly everything was locked, and the suspect had a lockpick set. There were stories of the parents giving the kids medicine so they'd sleep. Stories of there being blood on the wall outside. In their car. Then suddenly Madeleine was a victim of constant nosebleeds. Then stories of a call made to a suspect. Y'all. I think the parents are involved. They either overdosed her on meds by accident or hid the body. Or they paid some guy to take her and then put out an appeal.
Like, why do they keep reopening the case every few years with a different story every time? It's suspicious and kind of freaks me out. The disappearance of Heidi Allen in 1994. She was a local in my county. She was working alone as a cashier at a gas station. She opened the store at about 5:45 a.m. and managed the store routinely for approximately 2 hours, with nothing out of the ordinary happening. Then a concerned citizen called at about 8 a.m. saying that the store was open, but no one was attending. She vanished and the police still haven't found her. 2 brothers were arrested as they were the last people to see her alive. The one brother kept saying he was innocent till the day he died. It was such an important thing in our country. Still no answers. The Zamora incident, one of the few alien stories that is believable, mainly because of Zamora himself. Although I'm quite sure he saw secret military stuff that ended up in the wrong spot. There was a military testing facility fairly close by. But it has never been solved. The Dyatlov Pass incident. A bunch of Russian hikers/skiers/alpinists went on a multi-day ski tour in winter in the Ural Mountains. Halfway into it, they cut their way out of their tents one night and all died. Some died from exposure, some died from trauma. Some were missing their eyes and tongues. A few started a fire. Some were naked. Some were fully clothed for conditions. Really, they were found all over the place and in various conditions that are just really hard to explain, especially considering they left the tents together walking, not running. There are multiple theories, with the official one being an avalanche, but the area isn't really avalanche prone, low angle/no obvious avalanche chute, and there were no signs of an avalanche when the bodies were found, debris field/disturbed snow. They were all able-bodied, young, and experienced in the environment. Personally, I am the John Benet Ramsey case. On the surface it looks like a regular break-in and murder, but every detail makes her family more suspicious. The fact that it's highly likely her family brutally murdered her and sullied the crime scene to throw off detectives makes them absolutely disgusting people who should face justice. The coldness that they must have had to treat their daughter, and her corpse, the way they did. They deny it all the time, but if it really wasn't them, how did the murderer do it? Finland incident. Well, it's not called that, but it was about a group of soldiers brutality attacked and their skins put on wooden poles. No one knows who or what attacked them, and another unsolved mystery I find creepy is Funky Town gore video, which to this day no one who was behind it or who the victim was. Only speculations. I read somewhere that he was one of the 43 missing students, but most people denied it cause they think Julio Cesar Mondragon was the only person to have his face flayed. Yuba County 5. 5 young men drive up a mountain, leave their vehicle behind, which is the prized possession of one of them, go into the forest in winter, and all but one of them has had their body found. Highly recommend the Windy Goon video. Jack the Ripper. Yes, not too original, but I saw the Lemniot video recently and finally learned in depth about the case. Seems very odd. Maybe it's because of the louse police work or cause little relation was between victims aside from their profession. I feel sometimes there could have been copycats, or maybe it was the same guy. Maybe it was the one that claimed he found a dying woman, he was about to get caught mid-act, or maybe it was the husband of the last victim, but that last one was different from the others because it was behind closed doors. Who knows, but the case intrigues me. The lead masks mystery. 3 fellas get up a hill in Brazil and just die. The only thing different was that they were wearing lead masks. Some reports say that they saw lights in the sky over the hill, like an aurora borealis. Others say that there were trace amounts of radiation. Lauren Spirer's disappearance. I live in Bloomington. I remember all the flyers and look for Lauren Day.
I still have to park near Kilroy's bar when I go downtown.
It's oddly bizarre.
I know it's not an especially creepy or mysterious case, but it happened in the town where I grew up.
It sticks out to me.
It's one thing when some bad happens in some distant locale.
It's another when you actually live in the area where it happened. The number of murders taking place in Texas between Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio along the highways is terrifying.
There have been assessments that there may be a full dozen different serial killers working in that territory. Edit, for those asking, the reason seems to be that there is an amazing amount of travel in that area. The number of people moving from one place to another for travel, for commuting, for visiting, hauling goods, is tremendously high. As a result, a girl goes missing in one location, is murdered in a second, and her body dumped in a third. The police who found the body never connected with the police who know she went missing. The people who were nearby and maybe saw something weren't neighbors. They were travelers.
Police couldn't find the witnesses if it were an hour after the crime, much less weeks or months.
And people traveling tend to mind their own business. There are those who seem to have discovered that these are amazingly effective hunting grounds.
A lot of people wind up missing there.
The poor.
The unlucky.
The desperate.
The unwise.
They just disappear.
And if they are found, they aren't identified.
No witnesses are ever questioned.
No crime scene is ever located.
It's an extremely grim business. Someone said the scary thing was that it could be someone standing next to you. The scary thing for me is that it could be your husband, or father, nor brother, or boss. Just some middle-aged man, rather strong, friendly.
Maybe ex-military, maybe police, maybe not. Softball coach.
Sometimes go out of town for work.
Someone you know.
That's the scary part for me.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.